Story number 1. The silent hallway, Oakwood High, was an ordinary school in a quiet town, but beneath its modern renovations and glossy trophy cases, there was a part of the building no one spoke about, the North Wing. It had been sealed off years ago after a tragic accident. The official story was that a fire had gutted the wing, rendering it unsafe. But students whispered of something far darker. They said the fire wasn't an accident. They said someone had died there. A girl named Claire who had been locked in a storage room as a prank. By the time anyone found her, it was too late, and they said her ghost still roamed the North Wing, waiting for someone to hear her cries. Rachel had heard the stories but didn't believe them. She was a senior, practical, and level-headed. Ghosts weren't real, she told herself, just figments of overactive imaginations. That's why, when her friend Lily dared her to step into the North Wing, she didn't hesitate. 5 minutes, Lily said, smirking. You go in, take a selfie to prove it, and come right back out. Easy. Fine, Rachel replied, rolling her eyes. You're going to owe me lunch for a week. The old entrance to the North Wing was hidden behind a maintenance-only door at the end of the east hallway. The door creaked as Rachel pushed it open, revealing a dark corridor beyond. Lily handed her a flashlight. Don't chicken out. See you in 5, Rachel said, stepping inside. The air changed the moment she entered. It was colder, heavier, and carried the faint smell of smoke and mildew. The flashlight's beam flickered as Rachel swept it over the peeling walls and shattered windows. The hallway was silent except for the soft crunch of her footsteps on the debris-strewn floor. She walked past darkened classrooms, their desks overturned and chalkboards blank. Nothing creepy yet, she muttered, her voice sounding too loud in the stillness. As she moved deeper into the wing, she noticed something strange. The lockers lining the walls weren't covered in dust like everything else. Their doors were pristine, the metal gleaming as if they'd been polished recently. Rachel frowned, stepping closer. She reached out to touch one, but the instant her fingers brushed the surface, a loud clang echoed through the hallway. She whipped around, her flashlight darting over the empty corridor. Hello, she called, her voice trembling now. No answer, her heart racing. Rachel continued walking, determined to find the end of the hallway and take her selfie. But the farther she went, the more she realized something was wrong. The hallway wasn't ending. She should have reached the storage room by now, the one everyone said was haunted. But the corridor stretched on endlessly, the same rows of lockers and broken tiles repeating like a loop. She stopped and turned back, but the way she had come was shrouded in darkness. This isn't right. Her phone buzzed and she nearly dropped it. A message from Lily popped up. You okay? You've been in there for 20 minutes. Rachel's stomach twisted. It hadn't been that long, had it? Her fingers hovered over the screen to reply, but before she could type, another message came through. Come back. Rachel's heart sank. She hadn't told Lily about the strange repeating hallway, and the tone of the message wasn't Lily's usual teasing. It felt wrong. She typed back quickly, I'm coming. Wait for me. But as she hit send, the flashlight flickered again, and this time it went out completely. Damn it, she hissed, smacking it against her palm. When the light returned, she froze. A figure stood at the end of the hallway. It was a girl, her head bowed, her long, dark hair hanging over her face. She wore an old-fashioned school uniform, its skirt tattered and scorched at the edges. Rachel took a step back. Who are you? The girl didn't move. Look, I'm leaving, Rachel said, her voice cracking. I'm sorry if I wasn't supposed to be here. The girl's head snapped up and Rachel's breath caught. Her face was pale, almost translucent, with hollow eyes that burned with an unnatural light. You can't leave, the girl whispered, her voice echoing unnaturally. Rachel turned and ran. She sprinted back the way she'd come, her flashlight bobbing wildly, but no matter how far she ran, the hallway didn't change. Behind her, the girl's footsteps echoed, slow and deliberate. You can't leave, the voice repeated, louder now, closer. Rachel tripped, crashing to the floor. Her phone skidded out of her hand, landing face up. The screen lit up with a single message. Too late. The flashlight flickered one last time before dying completely. In the darkness, Rachel felt the air grow colder, the girl's presence looming over her. A hand, small, icy, and impossibly strong, clamped down on her wrist. Rachel screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the silence of the North Wing. The next morning, Lily waited by the maintenance door, her stomach twisting with guilt. Rachel never came out. The janitors searched the north wing but found nothing except Rachel's phone, lying in the middle of the hallway. The last photo on it was a blurry selfie of Rachel, her expression terrified, and behind her, a shadowy figure with hollow eyes. The school officially ruled Rachel's disappearance as a runaway case, but Lily knew better. Weeks later, as she walked past the sealed-off north wing, she thought she heard something. A faint scream echoing from behind the locked door. And then, silence. Story number 2. The locker that won't stay closed. Westbridge High School's locker 213 had been empty for years. It wasn't broken, nor did it look any different from the other lockers lining the hall. But everyone knew the story. If you used locker 213, bad things happened. The last student assigned to it, Chris Alvarez, had vanished without a trace. Before him, a girl named Nina Wilson reportedly had a mental breakdown, scrawling strange symbols in her textbooks before dropping out. And before her, a sophomore fell down the main staircase after claiming she saw something in the locker. The administration tried to reassign it every year, but after one too many complaints, they finally sealed it shut with a heavy padlock. Students avoided it, and soon it became just another piece of forgotten school folklore. Until Mia transferred to Westbridge, Mia was new, and she wasn't interested in ghost stories or local legends. She was focused on surviving her junior year and making new friends. When the office handed her a slip assigning her locker 213, she didn't even blink. The first day, she approached it with her combination ready, ignoring the whispers of her classmates. The padlock was gone. The locker door swung open easily, revealing an empty space with a faint metallic smell. "Lucky you," a girl nearby muttered. "Dead kid's locker." Mia rolled her eyes and started loading her books. The first strange thing happened the next morning. When Mia arrived at school, the locker was wide open, her books and supplies scattered on the floor. She frowned, kneeling to gather her things. "Who did this?" Her friend Chloe shrugged. "Probably some jerk trying to scare you." Mia gritted her teeth and closed the locker, twisting the combination lock tightly. But the next morning, it was open again. This time, her notebook was missing. In its place was a crumpled piece of paper, yellowed and brittle like it had been there for years. She unfolded it, her stomach tightening as she read the single word scrawled in jagged handwriting: "Run." Mia tried to ignore it. She didn't want to seem paranoid or scared, especially not in a new school. But as the days went on, things got worse. Her textbooks were found in the wrong places, their pages ripped. A strange, damp smell began emanating from the locker, like wet earth and rust. Then came the scratching. She first noticed it while walking to class. A faint, rhythmic sound echoed down the hall, like nails dragging across metal. She glanced back, but no one was there. When she opened her locker that afternoon, fresh gouges marred the inside of the door, deep and jagged. Chloe was the only one who believed her. "Just switch lockers," she suggested. "I can't," Mia replied. "They're all assigned." "Then stop using it." But when Mia tried leaving it empty, her belongings would somehow end up back inside, the door ajar. One night, unable to sleep, Mia decided to search for information about locker 213. She found old news articles about Chris Alvarez, the student who had disappeared. He was last seen at school late one evening, reportedly looking for his lost history textbook. His family had begged for answers, but no one ever found him. Another article mentioned Nina Wilson, who had drawn the same symbols over and over in her notebooks, circles with jagged edges intersected by slashes. Mia froze. She had seen those symbols. They were scratched into the back of the locker. The final straw came a week later. Mia stayed late after cheer practice, heading to her locker to grab her phone. The school was eerily quiet, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly. As she approached locker 213, the scratching started again. This time, it was louder. She hesitated, her heart racing. Slowly, she reached for the handle and pulled it open. The locker was empty except for her reflection in the small mirror attached to the back. But something was wrong. Her reflection wasn't moving. Mia stepped back, but her reflection stayed where it was, staring at her with wide, unblinking eyes. Its lips began to twist into a grin, too wide, too sharp. Before Mia could scream, the door slammed shut on its own. The next morning, Chloe waited for Mia by the lockers, but she never showed up. The school was buzzing with rumors. Mia's parents said she hadn't come home. The police searched the school but found no trace of her. Locker 213 was sealed again, this time with metal bolts and warning tape. But sometimes when the hallways are empty, students swear they hear it creak open. And if you're brave or foolish enough to look inside, you might catch a glimpse of a face staring back at you, but it won't be your own. Story number 3, The Substitute. It started with a new face in the teacher's lounge. Mrs. Hammond, the usual history teacher for room 305, was out on maternity leave, and the school brought in Mr. Carter, a substitute who no one had heard of before. He was strange, tall and gaunt, with pale skin that seemed to almost glow under the harsh fluorescent lights. Mr. Carter dressed in outdated suits and spoke in a slow, deliberate manner that made students uncomfortable. But what stood out most were his eyes. They were an unnatural shade of gray, like ash, and seemed to follow you even when you weren't looking at him. The rumors started almost immediately. "He doesn't blink," whispered Mia, a sophomore who sat in the front row. "His shadow doesn't match his body," muttered Kevin, who always skipped class until now, because he was afraid of what might happen if he didn't show up. By the second week, things got worse. Assignments left on Mr. Carter's desk vanished, only to reappear later, marked in red ink with comments written in a language no one could understand. Students reported feeling dizzy in his classroom, the air heavy and suffocating, even though the windows were always open. And then there was the seating chart. Every day, Mr. Carter would rearrange the students, his long fingers hovering over the roster as if he were searching for something. The names he called always ended up in the front row. Mia noticed the pattern first. The students he moved would stop coming to school. One by one, they disappeared. "Where's Kevin?" Mia whispered to her friend Zoe during lunch. "He didn't come back after third period," Zoe said, her voice trembling. "His mom said he never came home last night." Mia's stomach twisted. That made 3 students in just a week. "We have to tell someone," Zoe said. But who would believe them? Mia decided to stay after class that day. She waited until the final bell rang and everyone else had filed out. Mr. Carter stood at the front of the room, erasing the board with slow, deliberate motions. "Mr. Carter?" she asked, her voice shaking. He turned to face her, his gray eyes locking onto hers. "Yes, Mia." How do you know my name?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I know all my students' names." Mia hesitated, her pulse racing. What's happening to the kids who disappear?" For a moment, the room was silent, the only sound the faint hum of the overhead lights. Then Mr. Carter stepped closer. "They're going where they belong," he said softly. "Where's that?" His smile widened, revealing teeth that were too sharp, too white. "You'll see soon enough." Mia bolted out of the room, her heart pounding. She ran straight to the principal's office. But when she tried to explain, Principal Warren just shook his head. "Mr. Carter came highly recommended," he said. "You kids just need to focus on your work." "Did you even check his credentials?" Mia snapped. Principal Warren's face darkened. "That's enough, young lady. Go home." That night, Mia couldn't sleep. Her dreams were filled with strange gray eyes and whispers in a language she didn't understand. When she woke up, her bedroom window was open, even though she was sure she'd locked it. On her desk was a piece of paper she didn't recognize. It was her name, written in red ink. Mia skipped school the next day, her fear outweighing her need for answers. But that night, she heard it. 3 soft knocks on her door. She froze. "Mom?" No response. She crept to the door and peered through the peephole. Mr. Carter stood on her porch, his gray eyes glowing in the dark. "I told you," he whispered, his voice muffled through the wood. "You'll see soon enough." Mia stumbled back, her phone slipping from her hand. She tried to scream, but her voice caught in her throat as the door creaked open on its own. The last thing she saw was his smile, impossibly wide as the shadows swallowed her whole. The next morning, the students in room 305 noticed something odd. Mia's desk was empty, but her name was still on the seating chart, circled in red. And Mr. Carter. He just smiled and began the lesson as if nothing had happened. By the end of the semester, there were no students left in room 305. No one ever spoke of Mr. Carter again.